Beruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Tzadik Beis at the new Perek. Our Perek opens up with an exception to the rule that we have found until now. Until now we've been discussing many different things and their minimum shiurim for a person to be chayiv for meleches hoitzah. Our Mishnah brings an exception to that rule for things that, although it's not the typical minimum shiur, but if a person is machshiv that item, then he gives it chashivus, and therefore will have a minimum shiur even smaller than that which is typical. Says the Mishnah, hamatzniya lezera uledugma ulerefua. A person who puts aside a seed for planting, or something to show a dugma, an example to somebody else with, or for a refuah, whatever it is, he takes something that is very small and he puts it aside. He stores it away, v'hoitziyoi b'Shabbos. Subsequently, he takes it out on Shabbos. Chayiv b'kol shehu is going to be chayiv for the minimal amount, that amount that he stored away. Now, honestly, this sounds familiar because we learned in the 7th parak, Daf Ayin Hey Amud Beis, the Mishnah also taught that even though it's not the typical minimum amount, but if a person were to be matzniya a certain amount, even smaller than the typical amount, and then subsequently he's motziyah from the shus hayochid to shus rabim, or vice versa, he's going to be chayiv a korban chatos. So we have to understand what is the chiddush here, and Be'ez Hashem the Gemara will explain. V'chol adam ein chayiv alov ella kishiuroi, but where everybody else, however, will only be chayiv for the typical shiur that Chazal instituted based on the regular usage. The Seif of the Mishnah says, Chazar v'hichnisoi eino chayiv ela kishiuroi. If that person, after being matzniya it, he then took it out into the Rishus Harabim, so we said he's chayiv a korban chatos even for that minimum shiur. If then, when he's in the Rishus Harabim, he then decides to change his mind, he's not going to use that small seed, let's say, lizriya. He doesn't want to use it for a minimum shiur anymore. So therefore, he changes his mind and he decides to now take that item from the shus harayim back into the shus hayochid. He's not going to be chayiv a korban chatos for that. And again, we have to explain that chiddush as well. Because after all, if a person changed his mind, therefore, it goes back to the regular status. Why should it require a person being chayiv for something that's smaller than the regular status? So Be'ez Hashem, the Gemara will explain that as well. Ask the Gemara right away, Lama leila misni hamatzniya. Why does our Mishnah have to teach that he put it aside, and then talk about that he took it out from the shus hayochid to shus harabim? Lisni hamoitzi lezera uledugma ulerefua. Just say straightforward that he took out one of these items, either to plant, let's say a small seed that he gave significance to, that he's going to then plant, or to show as a dugma to somebody else, or for a refuah, and that would be enough to tell us this din that he's going to be chayiv because he was machshiv this smaller amount. Omar Abaye comes and explains, Hocha b'may askinon kigon shehitznioi v'shochach lema hitznioi. He originally put it aside, let's say lizriya, and then subsequently he forgot about why he put that aside. He takes that item, that seed, let's say, and he then goes out on Shabbos from the shus hayochid to the shus harabim. Says the Mishnah, v'hashta kamafik leistama. When he now takes it out on Shabbos, it's without any intention. It's stama. So the Gemara explains, Mahu disema, you might have thought to say, bitule batlo machshavtoi, that his machshava, original machshava of being matzniya for lizriya, is batul, is null and void. Kamash malon kol ha'oise al das rishona hu oise. Kamashal, our Mishnah comes to teach us that a person does bedas rishoino. That means that since he originally put it aside lizriya, so long as he has not consciously changed that decision, then when he comes and takes it out subsequently, even stama, it will be mechayiv and korban chatos. And now we have the chiddush that we mentioned before. We said that in the 7th parak we already learned that a person is matzniya, an object, even if it's smaller than the average shiur, and then he's moitzi it in the Dirshu Rabbim, he's going to be chayiv a korban chatos. So here we have in our Mishnah Tosefes chiddush. That's why it's taught that he is first matzniya, because we're saying over here he's matzniya, and then he didn't intend to take out lizriya, but since he's never changed that original intention, he will be chayiv a korban chatos. Says the Gemara weiter, Omar Rav Yehuda Omar Shmuel mechayiv hay Rabbi Meir af b'moitzi chita achas lizriya. Rabbi Meir will even be mechayiv a korban chatos if a person takes one seed of a piece of wheat in order to plant it. That's going to mechayiv a korban chatos, even though again that's smaller than the typical shiur. Ask the Gemara right away, pshita kol shehu tanan. After all, the Mishnah, the Stam Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, and it says in our Mishnah kol shehu. That means the minimum shiur. So certainly he will be mechayiv for this chita achas. Answers the Gemara, Mahu Desema, you might have thought to say, Kol Shehu la'apuke migrogeres. When it says Kol Shehu in the Mishnah, it just means to say, to exclude the typical shiur of a grogeres, which is mechayiv, someone who takes food out on Shabbos for Hotzah. Ula oilam adi ika kazais. However, it still requires a minimum shiur of a kazais, because that's a shiur chashuv. Kamash malan. Therefore, our Mishnah comes to teach us, or this in this case, therefore Rabbi Meir will say that it's going to mechayiv even though it's not a kezayis, because it has chashivus as one chito. Maskif lo Rav Yitzchok bereid Rav Yehuda. Based on this yesoid that a person can be machshiv an item, and that only then will give it chashivus for the shear of hoitzah, ask the Gemara the following question. Elo me'ato choyshev lo hoitzi kol beisoy hochinamid lo mechayiv ad demapik lekule. If a person intends to take out all of that which is in his house in one hoitzah, will he only be chayiv then for that shiur, because his intention is to take out all of those items bebas achas? Certainly not. Says the Gemara, no. Hasam botla daito eitzel kol adam. Over there, certainly his das will be nullified. It'll be botla eitzel kol adam, because we say the typical amount has a certain minimum shiur. And certainly you don't have to then require that you take all of these items in one's household in order to be mechayiv for korban chatos. The Gemara now quotes the Mishnah, v'chol adam ein chayavin alav ela ki shi'uroi. Everybody else, however, aside from the one who was matzniya this item, everybody else will not be chayiv if he were to take that item that is a koshu or a smaller shear into the Rishus HaRabim. Says the Gemara with this following observation, Masnisin deloy Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Our Mishnah is not like the Shita of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. The Tanya, Klal Omar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, the Brisa brings a klal in his name. Kol she'eno kosher lahatzniya, ve'ein matzniyin kamoihu, v'huchsha lezeh v'hitzniyoy, something that is not fitting to be stored away and put aside, and the object is not then normally put aside, and this person does put it aside specifically because he gives it chashivus, then even another individual who will take this item that he was matzniya, and he will take such an item outside from the Shisa Yochid Shisa Rabbi, he will be chayiv also. So clearly our Mishnah is not like this Shita, because our Mishnah is only the one who's matzniya, who gave it chashivus himself will be chayiv, but somebody else would not be chayiv. Says the Gemara weiter, Omar Rav Nachman. Rav says the name of Rav Nachman the following: Hoitzi kigrogeres la'achila. A person took out an item the size of a grogeres for achila, to eat it. V'nim lach aleh lizriya. He changed his mind. Instead of eating that core of an apple, he decided he's going to then be matzniya it. He wants to then, to be zoreya it. He wants to plant it. Inami lizriya v'nimlach aleh la'achila. Or he takes that apple, and instead of planting the apple, he decides that he wants to eat it. So we're talking about an apple. So once again, either he takes out the apple to eat it, and he changes his mind when he gets to the Rishus HaRabim in order to then be zoreya, and then he places it down. Or he takes that apple out in order to then be zoreya, and when he gets to the Rishus HaRabim, he changes his mind and decides he wants to eat the apple. What's the din? According to this, Rav Nachman Chayev says the Gemara Pshita, of course he would be Chayev. Why? Because Zil Hacha Ika Shi'ura, Vizil Hacha Ika Shi'ura. Whichever way you go, you'll go here, you'll have a full Shi'ur. You'll go here, you have a full Shi'ur. That means that since we're talking about, let's say, an apple, which is a grogeres, at least a dried fig's worth of an apple, since that's the shear of achila, you'll be chayav for achila. If it's going to be for zeriya, then certainly you have more than the shear of zeriya, which is much smaller than a grogeres. Says the Gemara, Mahu desema, what might you have thought to say? Bo'inin akira v'hanocha bechada machshava v'holeka. I might think that since every hoitzah requires a akira, to take it out from one rishus and a hanocha into the other rishus. So I think you don't have that, because since over here, when he had the akira, it was a different intention than when he had the hanocha. And therefore we'll split the two. Kamash malan, they're one hotzah. And therefore he would be chayiv. Boy, Rava asks further. Hoitzi chatzi grogeres lizriya v'tifcha. He takes out a half a grogeres in order to then plant that grogeres, that's size grogeres, that dried fig size, let's say of an apple. The chatzi grogeres that he take out to then plant, it then becomes bigger. It grows. V'nimlach aleh la'achila. It grows to the size of a grogeres, and then he changes his mind when he gets to the Rishus HaRabim, and he wants to eat the apple. Mao, what's the din? What is the din over here? If you want to say Hasom hu demechayev de zil hacha ika shiura v'zil hacha ika shirua, like we said previously, that you go after each shear, that you'll have a full shear, and therefore that's why you're chayiv. Aval hacha kiven de ba'idna de afka lo yhava beishir achila lo mechayev. But over here, when he left and he did the akira, there it wasn't a full shear; it was only a half a grogeres. Therefore, maybe he's not going to be chayiv. Oy dilma kiven di ilu ishtik v'lo chashiv alei mechayiv amachshav v'dezriya hashanam mechayiv. But on the other hand, if he were to remain silent, that means to say if he wouldn't have changed his mind and he would remain with the same machshava that he had when he made the akira, which would be to be zoreya this apple, so therefore he would certainly be chayiv. So too he should be chayiv over here as well. In other words, it doesn't interrupt the fact that he had a change of mind. His intention doesn't interrupt the akira from the hanocha. V'im timtzo loymar. And Rabbi goes on to say further, if you want to take on this side, the kivin the ilu ishtik v'le chashiv ale mechayiv amachshava deziriya hashanam mechayiv. You take on this side that if he would have remained silent in this previous case, and thereby he continued with his original intention of being zoreya this apple, he would be chayiv. So therefore we'll suggest now as well, even though he intends now to eat it, since it has the shear, it doesn't interrupt between the akir and the hanacha to be chayiv. Then he asks the following: then hoitzi kigrogeres laachila vitzomka. In the opposite direction, if he takes out a full grogeres to eat, let's say again we're talking about something that's going to be like an apple, something that's edible, and therefore it has a full shear when he takes it out, when he does the akira, vitzomka, and then it diminishes, it becomes less than that shear of a grogeres. V'nimlach ale lizriya, and he changes his mind to plant, which is certainly enough of a shear to plant. Ma, what's the din then? Hocha vada ki ishtik amachshava kamaisa loy mechayev. Here, certainly, if he would have remained silent, that means if he wouldn't have changed his intention from the eating, then he would not be chayiv because it loses its shear by the time he does the hanocha in the Rishus HaRabim. Oy dilma basar hashta azlinan umechayev. Or no, we say you go after the present state, and now, since he wants to be Zoreya, even though it's less than the shear of Achila, it's a proper shear for Zoreya, and therefore you'll have a Hanacha to mechayev him for the Malacha of Hoitzah. Vim timtzo loymar. One following question asks Rava, and if you want to say basar hashta azlinon umechayev, that you go after the present condition, and therefore he'll be chayev, making the hanacha to connect with the original akira to be chayev for hoitzah, then hoitzi kirogeres laachila v'tzomka v'chazer v'tavcha mau. If he takes out the size of a grogeres to eat, then it diminishes, and then it returns and gets full again to be the size of a grogeres. So what do we say then? Yesh dichui le'inyan Shabbos. Is there dichui? Do we say that we push aside, it becomes disqualified? Just like a carbon, for example, if there's a psul, it will then be pasul forever. So too over here, once there's a psul in this case, once it loses its shiur from a grogeres to less than a grogeres, thereby it's no longer going to be including this malach of hoitzah. There's a disconnection between the initial akira and the subsequent hanacha. Or there is no concept of dichui in regards to Shabbos, and therefore he would be chai because it has a shear when he did the akira, and it then has a shear once again when he does the hanacha. Teiku, the Gemara leaves these questions as unanswered. Says Gemara weiter, Boy minei Rava me Rav Nachman. He asked Rav Nachman the following: Zora kezayis truma lebayis tamei mahu. If a person throws a kezayis of truma into a bayis which is tamei, that means the bayis has a mace inside of it, and therefore when he throws this kezayis of truma, what is the din? Ask the Gemara lamai. In what connection are we asking this question? Ile inyan Shabbos kigrogeris ba'inan. If it's in regards to Shabbos, the malach of hoitzah, you need a full shear of a grogeris. Ile inyan tuma bebeitza oichalin ba'inan. If it's going to be in regards to tuma, then you need a whole shear of a beitza. And here we have a kezayis, which is half of a beitza. So what is the question? Explains the Gemara, la'olam the inyan Shabbos, we are asking in regards to the malach of hoitzah gabe Shabbos. And we're talking about there was a less than a kabetza already situated in that bayis that's tameh, where the base was. And now this kazayis that was thrown of truma, that let's say goes next to this piece of food that was less than a kabetza, it now is mashlim the shear to be a full beitza. What's the din? Do we say that since it will have the status of tuma because it's now a full kabetza, therefore do we say it also then has also a hitztarfus in the inyan Shabbos, and we say therefore there's a full shear here as well? Or dilma kol inyan Shabbos kirgogeres bo'in, or no, we say that in regards to Shabbos it needs a grogeres, and therefore, since you don't have that, it's not going to be chayav. Omar lei, so he turns back, Rav Nachman, to Rava, and he says, Tinisua, we are taught something that can prove as a precedent to this question. Abba shol oimer, shtei halechem velechem aponim. The shtei halechem, the two loaves that are brought on Shavuos, or the lechem aponim which are brought every week on Shabbos, the showbreads, shi'uron kigrogeres. If a person were to take those out on Shabbos, then he would be chayiv for meleches hoitzah if a shear of a grogeres. Ve'amai. Why is this so? Leima midli inyan yoitze b'kezayis linin Shabbos nine b'kezayis. We're on the top of Tzadik Aleph Amud Beis. Let us say that when he goes out with a kezayis le'inyan Shabbos nine b'kezayis, that means to say that in regards to there's an isser where a person were to go out with one of these breads, and then he would, let's say, subsequently eat, he would be chayiv malchus. So therefore, the shear of him going out into the azara, when he would leave from he would leave, then he would be chayiv a shear of a kazayis. So we should say so too over here in regards to Shabbos, the shear of hoitzo would be kazayis. So we see from this precedent, says Rav Nachman, that clearly that which is the din somewhere else, we don't say that that's then going to then mitzaref to the same din by Shabbos. And therefore we can answer our question here too. The fact that he threw a kazayis into the Beis HaTameh, right, of Truma, although it might mitzaref to a kabetza in regards to Tuma, but it will not mitzaref to then be mechayev him for hotzah. The Gemara says, Hachi hashta, is this a comparison? Hasam mida'afke chutz lechoymos ha'azara. There, we're talking about leaving. When it said yotzer, we're talking about leaving the azara. When you leave the azara, then you need a kezayis aposile in regard to the lechem aponim or the shtei lechem. But b'yotzei, Ashabis lo mechayiv adam mafik le'levishtarim. But in regards to yotzei, it wouldn't be good enough to go outside of the azara because that's not yet a rishus harabim. For that to be chayiv on Shabbos, where you have to go into a rishus harabim. So certainly there's no comparison from one to the next. B'yotzei, b'hacha Shabbos v'tuma b'hadi adadi ka'asyan. But over here, both Shabbos and Tumah, they come together, bebas achas, at the simultaneously. And therefore, over here, the question is, what is the din if a person were to throw a kazayis of Truma into a Beis HaTameh, where there is already a shear less than a kabetza? We know it's mitzaref for purposes of making it tameh. Does it also then mechayiv somebody for hotzah? Says the Gemara, weiter, bringing now the Mishnah, Chazar, in the Sefer it says, Chazar v'hichnisoi, eino chayiv elek kishi'uroi. If a person, once he was already now in the Rishus HaRabim, after he took that small object that was less than a shear, but he was machshiv it when he was matzniya it, and he then took it out from the Rishus HaYachid to the Rishus HaRabim, if he now changes his mind, that he's not going to use it, for example, lezriya, and then he brings it back in the Rishus HaYachid, the Mishnah says that he's not going to be chayiv korban chatas. Ask the Gemara, pshita. That's certainly straightforward. Why would he be chayiv? After all, he's not using it for zriya anymore. He decides that he can use it like everybody else. So it's not a shiur. Omar Abaye explains, Hacha b'may askinon kigon shezarkoi la'oitzer u'mekoymoy niker. Abaye explains that he threw it, let's say the seed, back to where the oitzar, where all of the other seeds were, but it didn't get mixed in. It was still a little bit on the side without being mixed in entirely. And therefore, the place where this seed was nicker. It was recognizable that this seed was still separate somewhat. Mao the same, you might think to say, Kivan de mekoimoy nicker b'milse kamaisa koi. Since it is recognizable where its place is, where it's situated, therefore, you might think to say that it has its original status. He was not nullifying. He was not being choizer from his original intention entirely. Therefore, our Mishnah comes to teach us otherwise. The fact that he just threw it to the oitzer, that itself is an action that shows that he rescinded his original intention.